The morning it all ended began the same way every morning in Clover Hill began, with birdsong, the smell of dew on pine straw, and the low hum of a lawnmower somewhere down the block. But on this particular Tuesday, a gray, overcast Tuesday in late September of 2021, there were other sounds too. The crunch of official vehicles rolling slow and deliberate down Sycamore Bend. The creak of a car door opening. The sharp, practiced knock of a badge against a front door. And then a woman's voice, high and sharp as breaking glass, cutting through the quiet Georgia morning. "You can't be serious. You cannot be serious right now." Master Sergeant Raymond Dale Kowalski, retired, United States Army, 26 years of service, sat on his back porch in a faded canvas chair, hands wrapped around a white ceramic mug, steam rising slow into the autumn air. He didn't go to the window. He didn't look over the fence. He just watched a cardinal land on his late wife's bird feeder, tilted his head slightly, and took a sip of coffee. He'd been waiting 48 hours for this moment. And a man like Raymond Kowalski knew how to wait. Let me tell you about Clover Hill, Georgia. It sits about 22 miles southeast of Atlanta, tucked between two low ridgelines where the Georgia pines grow tall and close together, and the roads curve gently like they were drawn by someone in no particular hurry. It's the kind of place where people still put American flags out before Memorial Day and leave them through the 4th of July, where kids ride bikes until the streetlights come on and nobody thinks twice about it. Sycamore Bend is a cul-de-sac off the main road, 11 houses arranged in a gentle arc, each with a quarter-acre lot, most with vegetable gardens or above-ground pools or both. The houses were built in the early 90s, brick front with white trim, mature trees in every yard. The streets smelled like mulch in the spring and wood smoke in the fall. The neighbors on Sycamore Bend knew each other, really knew each other. Philly's Ockaffer at number 4 watched everybody's mail when they traveled. The Hendersons at number 9 hosted a 4th of July cookout that had been running unbroken since 1998. Even the teenagers on the street were polite, raised to wave at adults, to hold doors, to understand that a neighborhood is something you belong to, not just something you live in. It was, by any honest measure, a good place to be. The kind of place a man comes home to after a long time away. The kind of place a man deserves. And for 6 years, from the spring of 2015 through the summer of 2021, the house at 14 Sycamore Bend had been Raymond Kowalski's. Master Sergeant Raymond Dale Kowalski, United States Army, retired. Born 1963 in Youngstown, Ohio. Enlisted at 18. Served 26 years across 3 decades, 3 continents, and conflicts that shaped the modern world, from the tail end of the Cold War through the deserts of Iraq during Operation Desert Storm, through peacekeeping deployments in Bosnia, through 2 tours in Afghanistan in the early 2000s, attached to the 10th Mountain Division out of Fort Drum, New York. He'd been a combat engineer, then a senior NCO, and this part matters, so hold on to it. He'd spent the last 9 years of his career in a support role to the Army's Criminal Investigation Division, commonly known as the CID. Not an agent. He was careful to explain the distinction to anyone who asked. He was the man who built the cases, organized the evidence, managed the documentation chains, prepared packages that could survive a court-martial or a federal trial. He'd helped put corrupt contractors in prison. He'd helped dismantle supply theft rings in Kandahar. He understood at a bone-deep level how evidence worked, how documentation worked, how the law worked when the law was used properly. He retired in 2010 at 47 with a chest full of commendations and a pair of hearing aids he wore in his left ear, the result of a mortar strike outside Fallujah in 2004 that killed 2 men standing 6 feet to his right. He didn't talk about that. He talked about woodworking. He had a shop behind his house, nothing fancy, a workbench, a bandsaw, a lathe his father had left him. He made furniture, chairs mostly. He'd made 2 Adirondack chairs for the Hendersons after their fire. He'd made a jewelry box for Phyllis Ockaffer's granddaughter when she was born. His wife, Carol, had died in 2018, pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. Raymond had been at her side for every one of those 77 days. After she died, he planted a rose garden along the back fence, 6 bushes, white roses her favorite. He had 1 dog, A brindle boxer named Sergeant, named before he'd thought too hard about how that might sound, who was 7 years old and slept at the foot of his bed, and considered it her personal responsibility to alert Raymond to every squirrel, mail carrier, and falling leaf in the zip code. Raymond was not a talkative man, but he was known on Sycamore Bend for appearing, without announcement, whenever something needed doing. When a storm took down a section of the Hendersons' fence, Raymond was there with tools the next morning. When old Mr. Totham at number 2 fell and broke his hip, Raymond drove him to physical therapy every Tuesday for 4 months without being asked. He was 58 years old. He walked with a slight hitch in his right knee, old shrapnel, never fully cleared. He drank his coffee black. He woke at 5:15 every morning because 26 years of the United States Army had made 5:15 feel like sleeping in. He was the kind of man that, once you understood who he was, you did not want on the wrong side of. The couple who moved in next door had not taken the time to understand who he was. That was their first mistake. The house at 16 Sycamore Bend had been vacant for almost 5 months after the previous owners relocated to Florida. It sat with a realtor lockbox on the door and a sold sign that went up in late June of 2021. The moving truck arrived on a Friday. A big one, the professional kind, with movers in matching uniforms rather than borrowed college friends. It was followed by a pearl white 2021 Porsche Cayenne and a gunmetal gray BMW 5 Series, both clean enough to suggest they'd never seen a gravel road. The couple who stepped out of those vehicles were Brock and Madison Whitfield. Brock was 34. He ran what he described loudly and repeatedly as a digital marketing consultancy, which, as best as anyone on the street could determine, meant he managed social media accounts for mid-tier brands and charged considerably more for it than the results suggested he should. He wore Bluetooth earbuds at all times. He spoke the way men speak who have never been told to be quiet. Madison was 32 and had a lifestyle brand on Instagram with approximately 140,000 followers. She photographed interiors, reviewed skincare products, and posted videos of herself making complicated coffee drinks. She described herself in her bio as an intentional living curator, which was a phrase that meant something in certain corners of the internet. They had moved from a condo in Buckhead, upscale Atlanta, because, as Madison told her followers in a 60-second reel posted the day of the move, they were escaping the noise and embracing their authentic suburban chapter. The authentic suburban chapter began inauspiciously. Within 40 minutes of the moving truck arriving, Brock had positioned his BMW across the front of Raymond's driveway, fully blocking it so the movers would have room to work. No knock on the door, no apology, no note. Raymond noticed everything. He walked over, calm as a Sunday morning, and introduced himself. Brock looked up from his phone, looked Raymond up and down in that particular way some young men have, the way that takes inventory and finds the inventory underwhelming, and said, "Yeah, we'll be done in a few hours. You probably don't have anywhere to be anyway, right?" Then he went back to his phone. Raymond returned to his porch, sat down, and wrote the date, the time, and a brief description of the incident in a small green notebook he kept on the side table next to his coffee mug. He'd been keeping notebooks like that for 26 years. Old habits. The first real incident happened 3 weeks after the Whitfields moved in. On a Wednesday night, warm for late summer, the kind of Georgia night where the air sits heavy and close, they hosted what they called a housewarming experience. What the rest of Sycamore Bend called it was a party that went until 2 a.m. with a Bluetooth speaker on the back patio turned up loud enough to rattle Raymond's bedroom window. Raymond endured it. He was not unreasonable. People were allowed to have parties. But when it happened again the following Saturday and the Saturday after that, Raymond walked to the front door of 16 Sycamore Bend and knocked. Madison answered. She was holding a ring light and wearing a white linen outfit that had been specifically chosen to look effortlessly casual. Raymond introduced himself again, explained politely that the music was carrying through the fence and into his bedroom, asked, neighborly and without heat, if they might consider winding down before midnight on weeknights. Madison looked at him with the precise expression of someone who has been mildly inconvenienced by a piece of furniture. She called over her shoulder, "Brock, the neighbor is here." Brock appeared. He was wearing a quarter-zip pullover with the collar popped. He listened to Raymond for approximately 4 seconds before he smiled, a smile that did not involve his eyes, and said, "Look, man, we paid a lot for this house. We're going to enjoy it. You should think about getting a white noise machine. That's what successful people use." Then he closed the door. Raymond stood on the step for a moment, heard the music resume inside. He nodded once, the way men nod when they have filed something away in a place where it will keep until needed, and walked back across the lawn. He wrote it in the notebook, date, time, exact words. Now let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever tried to have a reasonable conversation with someone who has made up their mind that you don't matter? That your comfort, your sleep, your basic peace is simply not a consideration they're interested in making? Drop a comment and tell me what happened, because I think a lot of you know exactly what Raymond was feeling walking back across that lawn. And I think a lot of you know that the feeling isn't anger, not yet. It's something quieter. Colder, the feeling of a decision being made. Raymond went back to his porch. Sergeant the boxer pressed her face against his leg. He scratched behind her ears and stared at nothing for a while. "It's okay, girl," he said quietly. "We've got time." You see, folks, there's a particular kind of person in this world who mistakes a lack of retaliation for a lack of capability, who sees a man staying quiet and concludes the man has no options, who sees patience and reads it as weakness. Brock and Madison Whitfield were exactly that kind of person. And so it escalated. In August, Brock began parking his BMW 6 inches over the property line, crowding Raymond's narrow side yard where he stored a utility trailer, not enough to sue over, just enough to irritate. In early September, a section of the wooden privacy fence between the two properties, a fence Raymond had maintained and repainted every other spring, developed a pattern of small puncture holes along the bottom, like something had been wedged through repeatedly. Sergeant came inside one afternoon with a splinter driven into her paw that required a 40-minute visit to the vet on Peachtree Crossing Road, and $120 Raymond did not begrudge spending, but noted carefully in his green notebook. On September 9, 2021, a formal complaint was filed with the Clover Hill Homeowners Association. The complaint, submitted in Madison Whitfield's name, alleged that Raymond's woodworking shop behind his house was operating as an unlicensed commercial business in violation of HOA regulations and creating excessive noise and visual disturbance. Raymond received the letter from the HOA board on a Thursday morning. He read it twice. Then he called the HOA president, a woman named Gail Tran who had known Raymond for 4 years, and explained calmly that his woodworking was a private hobby producing no income, which he had documentation for should it be required. He also noted the timing of the complaint relative to his previous neighborly request. Gail Tran was a practical woman. The complaint was dismissed within a week. But Raymond noted the attempt. He noted all of it. He also, during this period, made a quiet investment in 3 outdoor security cameras. Wise brand, inexpensive but reliable, recording to cloud storage in 1080p with motion triggers and timestamp logging. One at the front corner of his garage, covering the driveway and the street. One mounted under the back eave, covering his yard and the fence line. One at the side of the house, covering his utility trailer and the property boundary. He installed them on a Saturday morning himself, taking perhaps 90 minutes total. He did not mention them to anyone on the street. He did not mention them to the Whitfields. Old habits. October came to Clover Hill like it always does, slowly first, then all at once. The dogwoods on Sycamore Bend went red. The smell of wood smoke began drifting from chimneys on cool evenings. Raymond's rose bushes along the back fence had finished their last bloom of the season, and he'd spent a Saturday morning cutting them back carefully for winter, talking to them the way he'd watched Carol talk to them when she was alive. It was, as best as he could make it, a peaceful season. And then, on the morning of October 14, 2021, a Thursday, Raymond walked out his back door to feed Sergeant and stopped. 2 cameras had been installed on the back exterior wall of 16 Sycamore Bend. Professional-grade hardware, not the inexpensive consumer cameras most people put up, mounted high, angled deliberately over the fence line. Pointed directly at his bedroom window. Not at the shared fence, not covering the Whitfield's own yard. Aimed with precision that required intention at Raymond Kowalski's private bedroom window. Raymond stood there in the gray October morning and looked at those cameras for a long moment. He was wearing his bathrobe. He had been sleeping in that room. He had been dressing in that room. The window had no external covering because a man in his own home has no reasonable expectation that his neighbor would install surveillance equipment specifically angled at his bedroom. He went back inside. He made coffee. He sat at his kitchen table for a while, not moving. Then he called his best friend of 31 years, a man named Dennis Farrow, who had served alongside Raymond in the Army for 19 years, and who had gone on to spend 14 years with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation before retiring at the rank of Assistant Special Agent in charge. The call lasted 22 minutes. When it was over, Raymond picked up his green notebook. He wrote the date, the time, a precise physical description of both cameras including their mounting positions and angles, and a single additional note at the bottom of the page. The note read, "2 can play." Now let me pause here and tell you something. If you think Raymond Kowalski is going to make a phone call and quietly complain and hope somebody does something, you have fundamentally misread the kind of man we are talking about. Because here's what nobody on Sycamore Bend knew at the time. Here's what Brock and Madison Whitfield, in all their confident arrogance, had never bothered to find out. And that's when everything changed. Here's what nobody knew at the time. Raymond Kowalski had spent 9 years supporting the Army's Criminal Investigation Division. He had built evidence packages that survived federal court. He understood, at a level of specificity that most civilians never encounter, the intersection of surveillance law, privacy law, and criminal statute. And what the Whitfields had done, deliberately positioning cameras to record into a private residence, was not a gray area. Under Georgia Code Section 1611-62, it is unlawful for any person to observe, photograph, or record the private activities of another person through a device without the consent of that person in any private place without that person's consent. The statute is clear. The penalties are significant, and the evidence, the fact of the camera, its angle, its deliberate positioning, was already on Raymond's security footage, time-stamped and cloud-backed. But Raymond didn't call the police that morning. He called Dennis Farrow, and Dennis, 22 minutes into their conversation, had said something important. "Ray, before you do anything, I want to know if there's more going on with these people." Because Dennis had heard the name Brock Whitfield before. Not in connection with Sycamore Bend. In connection with a digital fraud investigation that the Georgia Bureau of Investigation had been running quietly since early 2021, an investigation into a network of social media marketing operations that were fraudulently inflating engagement metrics and billing clients for ad placements that didn't exist. It was a wire fraud investigation, federal in scope. And Brock Whitfield's digital marketing consultancy, operating under the LLC name Whitfield Digital Group, had surfaced twice in the preliminary data collection. Nothing charged yet, nothing public, but under active investigation. Dennis had mentioned this to the lead investigator on the case, a GBI agent named Tasha Holt, 39, 12 years on financial crimes, and suggested she might be interested in the documents Raymond had been quietly compiling. 3 months of dated incident logs, time-stamped security footage, the HOA complaint paperwork, the veterinary receipt from Sergeant's paw injury, the camera photos from that morning. Agent Holt was, in fact, very interested. Here's the other thing nobody knew at the time. The fence between 14 and 16 Sycamore Bend ran along what both properties' deeds described as the shared property boundary. But back in June of 2021, when the Whitfields had moved in, their contractor had installed 2 new fence posts, upgrading sections of the shared fence on their side, and in doing so had placed those posts 4 inches over the property line, 4 inches onto Raymond's land. A survey would confirm it. Raymond had noticed this in August. He had a registered surveyor named William Osai come out on a Tuesday, confirm the encroachment, and file a documented report. He had said nothing to the Whitfields. He had just filed the survey in a folder with everything else. You see, folks, Raymond Kowalski did not believe in half measures. He did not believe in making one phone call and hopping for the best. He believed in waiting until the case was complete, until every piece was in place, until the moment of action would be final, comprehensive, and impossible to appeal. 26 years of building cases had taught him that patience was not weakness. Patience was strategy. And the strategy was ready. Direct hit. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever watched someone dig themselves deeper and deeper, and you could see it coming from a mile away, but they were too arrogant to see it themselves? Tell me in the comments. Because Brock and Madison Whitfield were about to discover something very important about their new neighbor, and they were going to discover it all at once. It was a Tuesday morning, October 19th, 2021, 48 hours after Raymond had documented the cameras. The sky over Clover Hill was the color of old concrete, flat gray, the kind of autumn sky that holds the light close to the ground. The temperature was 53 degrees. A light wind was moving through the pine trees along the ridge east of Sycamore Bend. Raymond was awake at 5:15, as always. Coffee was on by 5:20. He took his mug to the back porch and sat in the canvas chair and listened to the birds for a while. At 7:02 a.m., a Cobb County Sheriff's Department vehicle turned onto Sycamore Bend. At 7:04 a.m., it was followed by a dark blue Chevrolet Suburban with government plates and two unmarked sedans. At 7:06 a.m., two additional vehicles, one from the Clover Hill Code Enforcement Office and one belonging to a process server Raymond recognized by name, completed the procession. They parked with deliberate arrangement in front of 16 Sycamore Bend. Raymond sipped his coffee. Agent Tasha Holt and a deputy sheriff approached the front door of the Whitfield residence and knocked with the particular authority that distinguishes official knocking from all other kinds. At 7:09 a.m., Brock Whitfield opened the front door. He was wearing a gray athletic hoodie and holding a ceramic pour-over coffee cup with the word "hustle" printed on the side. His hair was uncombed. He had the look of a man who has never in his life answered the door to find this particular arrangement of vehicles and officials on his lawn. The color left his face in stages. Madison appeared behind him in a cream-colored bathrobe, phone already in hand, reflexively reaching for documentation, the content creator's instinct never fully sleeping. An officer asked her, politely but firmly, to put the phone down. The process server stepped forward first. He served Brock Whitfield with a civil suit filed by Raymond Dale Kowalski, 14 Sycamore Bend, Clover Hill, Georgia, alleging violation of Georgia Code 1611-62, unlawful surveillance, invasion of privacy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, seeking $180,000 in actual and punitive damages plus attorney's fees. He then served him with a second document, a cease and desist and property encroachment notice prepared by Raymond's attorney, citing the surveyor's report and demanding the removal of the improperly placed fence posts within 30 days or face an additional legal action for trespass and conversion. Agent Holt then introduced herself and explained, in the measured language of a financial crimes investigator, that Whitfield Digital Group, LLC was the subject of an active investigation under Georgia and federal wire fraud statutes, and that she had several questions and a warrant for certain business records. Brock Whitfield said nothing for approximately 6 seconds. Then he said, "I need to call my lawyer." "That's your right," Agent Holt said pleasantly. The code enforcement officer stepped forward last. He explained that the surveillance cameras installed on the exterior of 16 Sycamore Bend had been determined to violate Section 472 of the Clover Hill HOA Architectural Guidelines, which the Whitfields had signed upon purchase, prohibiting exterior modifications without board approval, and additionally that their positioning raised immediate issues of compliance with Georgia privacy statute. The cameras would need to be removed within 24 hours, or the HOA would authorize their removal at the Whitfields' expense. It took about 40 minutes all told. There were no handcuffs that morning. The fraud investigation was still building, and arrests, Raymond knew, come when the case is airtight, not before. But there was something nearly as satisfying. There was the sight of Brock Whitfield sitting on his front step, his pour-over coffee gone cold in his hand, the word "hustle" staring up at nobody in particular, while officials moved in and out of his home and his neighbors, one by one, drifted to their front porches and windows. Phyllis Ackaffer stood at the end of her driveway with her arms crossed. The Hendersons watched from their porch swing. Nobody said anything. At 14 Sycamore Bend, Raymond Kowalski finished his coffee, rinsed his mug in the kitchen sink, and went out to his workshop to continue sanding a chair he'd been working on. He never went to the window to watch. He didn't need to. The cameras came down that afternoon. A contractor Madison hired in a hurry at weekend rates removed them within 4 hours of the officials departing. The holes in the siding were patched badly, leaving pale squares of mismatched paint that could be seen from the street. The fence posts were a longer battle. Brock's attorney, a real estate lawyer named Gregory Stamm, retained hastily, challenged the survey findings for 6 weeks before a judge in Cobb County reviewed the documentation Raymond's team had assembled and ruled without visible deliberation in Raymond's favor. The posts were removed in December in the rain by a crew that charged Brock $2,400 for the work. The civil suit for the surveillance cameras proceeded through mediation in January of 2022. Brock and Madison Whitfield, on the advice of counsel, agreed to a settlement of $62,000, not including attorney's fees, which brought the total closer to $91,000 out of pocket. The wire fraud investigation took longer, the way federal investigations do. But in March of 2023, Whitfield Digital Group, LLC was named in a federal indictment alongside 4 other entities as part of a digital advertising fraud scheme that had defrauded clients of more than $2.3 million over 3 years. Brock Whitfield accepted a plea agreement. He was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, 3 years of probation, and full restitution. Madison's lifestyle brand did not survive the publicity. Her account lost 60,000 followers in 1 week. Brand partnerships were quietly dissolved. The account, as of this telling, has not posted in over a year. The house at 16 Sycamore Bend went on the market in February of 2022, well before the criminal case concluded. It sold in 30 days. Nobody on Sycamore Bend sent a going-away card. Nobody waved as the moving truck pulled away. Phyllis Acaffer watched from her driveway, arms crossed, expression neutral. The Hendersons did not come out of the house. Raymond Kowalski was in his workshop, running his bandsaw, making no particular note of the occasion. Direct hit, and I want to stop here and ask you something because it matters. When a person like Brock or Madison Whitfield finally faces what they've done, when the moving truck comes and the neighbors don't wave and the social media followers evaporate and the federal indictment lands on the kitchen table, do you think they understand what actually happened? Do you think they know it was never the cameras, never the fence, never the lawsuit? That it was the moment they looked at a quiet man and decided he didn't matter? Tell me what you think in the comments, because I think about this question a lot. Let me tell you what happened after. The house at 16 Sycamore Bend was bought by a young couple, Marcus and Denise Oyelaran, early 30s, both teachers, with a 4-year-old daughter named Amara who immediately and irrevocably fell in love with Sergeant the boxer. Amara would appear at Raymond's fence within a week of moving in, asking in the direct and unashamed way of 4-year-olds if she could pet the dog. Raymond, who had not laughed out loud in some time, laughed out loud. Sergeant did not wait for formal permission. Within a month, Amara was a regular visitor to the back porch. Marcus helped Raymond replace a section of gutter one Saturday morning, and Raymond built Amara a small wooden step stool, painted yellow at her request, that became one of her most treasured possessions. Denise brought food on holidays. She had an instinct for when a man had been alone long enough. Raymond did not say so, but the company helped. The rose bushes along the back fence, Carol's roses, survived the winter and bloomed again in May of 2022. 6 of them white, exactly as they had always been. Raymond cut 3 blooms and put them in a glass of water on his kitchen windowsill. As for Dennis Farrow, he was at Raymond's table for Christmas dinner that year, as he had been most years since they'd served together in Bosnia. They ate and talked slowly, the way old friends do when they have nothing left to prove to each other. Brock Whitfield reported to a federal correctional facility in Jessup, Georgia on the first Tuesday of September, 2023. He was 46 years old at that point. No, wait, he was 36. He had a long time to think about the choices that had brought him there. Madison, as of last report, was living with her parents in Savannah. She was not curating anything intentional at the moment. And Raymond Kowalski. He woke at 5:15 as always. Drank his coffee black as always. let Sergeant out into the yard, where sometimes Amara was already awake and watching through the fence. He worked in his shop, he built things that would outlast him. And on some quiet evenings, when the light came low and gold through the Georgia pines and the street was still, he would sit in his canvas chair on the back porch and look at the white roses. And he would be, in whatever way a man like that allows himself to be, at peace. You know, folks, I've been telling stories like this one for a while now. Stories about people who mistake decency for weakness. Who look at a quiet man, a man who has served, who has sacrificed, who has buried friends and a wife and the louder parts of himself, and see an easy target. They always make the same mistake. They see the canvas chair on the porch and think, that man has no power. They see the notebook and think, that's just an old man writing things down. They see the patience, the long, deliberate, unshakable patience, and they read it as resignation, as defeat, as someone who's already given up. And then 48 hours later, there are government vehicles on their lawn and a process server at their door and a federal agent asking questions they don't know how to answer. And they finally understand something they should have understood the moment they moved in. You don't get to know what a man is capable of just by looking at him. You don't get to write off a person's life experience just because it's quieter than yours. And you never mistake a patient man for a powerless one. Raymond Kowalski didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to threaten. He didn't need to escalate or react or give Brock and Madison Whitfield a single moment of the drama they seemed to be looking for. He just documented. He waited. And he let the law do what the law does when you hand it everything it needs. That's not weakness, folks. That is the most disciplined form of strength I know. So the next time somebody looks past you, looks through you like you're not a factor worth considering, remember Raymond Kowalski on his back porch in October, coffee in hand, Cardinal on the feeder, government vehicles rolling quiet down the street. Not even watching. Because he already knew how it ended. Never mistake a quiet man for a weak man. Never mistake patience for permission. And never ever point a camera at a veteran's bedroom and think there won't be consequences. He spent 26 years building cases. He built yours in 48 hours. This story is inspired by real events and public court records. Names, locations, and specific details have been changed or dramatized for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental.